Welcome back to Core Conversations, a podcast from the United States Coast Guard Academy Alumni Association. I'm First Class Ashlyn Murray.
And I'm First Class Carl DiGiorgio. Today we're sitting down with Dr. Elaine Fitzgerald Lewis, class of 1997, whose journey from the Academy to leading a statewide public health efforts is grounded in service, resilience, and a commitment to others. Dr. Fitzgerald Lewis brings a powerful perspective shaped by her time as a Coast Guard officer, her global work in public health, and her leadership today. Her story is one of finding your voice, building relationships, and leading with purpose, no matter the environment.
What really stands out in this conversation is how much of that foundation traces back to the Academy, especially the importance of trust, communication, and connection. Whether she's leading teams on a cutter or coordinating large-scale public health systems, those same leadership principles show up again and again. And for us as cadets, there's a lot to take away. From learning how to advocate for yourself in unfamiliar spaces to recognizing the value of listening before leading. This episode connects directly to what we're experiencing right now, both here at the Academy and as we prepare to enter the fleet here soon.
Before we get into the conversation, we want to take a moment to reflect on what Dr. Fitzgerald Lewis said in her episode. So, Ashlyn, what is one moment from this episode that really stood out to you?
What really stood out to me was about her finding her own voice as a leader. And she talks about the transition between the Coast Guard experience and her experiences here at the Academy and how she was able to translate that over into her current role.
For me, I think the thing that stood out to me most about her experience was how she found comfort and found her community here at CGA. As a cadet, that was really awesome to hear about. And I think it's something I could relate to and a lot of cadets can relate to about how she really worked to find her support system to help her be successful here. Thanks for that insight, Ashlyn. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. This is First Class Carl DiGiorgio, and you're listening to Core Conversations, a podcast of this USCGA Alumni Association. I'm here in the Alumni Center Studio 1887 with my co-host, Tara King Clark. And we're excited to welcome this episode's alumni guest, Dr. Elaine Fitzgerald Lewis, class of 1997. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, great to have you here. Something we started our podcast out with, so we have a 60-second career arc, so we're going to put you on the clock, put the pressure on
Right.
you, get you to recap your
timer
career.
out. Here we go.
Oh, goodness. Okay, let's see. I would start by saying that my path in public service began long before I put on my uniform. I was raised by two Filipino Americans whose lives were defined by service. And my father voluntarily enlisted in the U.S. Coast Guard and served more than 20 years. And my mother also came to the U.S. by addressing the nation's healthcare workforce shortage in the 70s. And from them, I learned early that honor, respect, and devotion to something bigger than yourself was not an abstract value, but rather something that we were practicing daily. And so I was born here in the U.S., spent part of my early childhood in the Philippines while my father was stationed in Guam. And those years shaped my understanding that place matters, where you are born and raised matters, and where you choose to serve others. And so that then transcended into this deep desire to work on issues. And during my active duty, I had the privilege of serving in roles that really stretched me, from being a weapons officer on a cutter, leading an all-male team across several countries, to shifting to national security operations after 9/11. And eventually I returned back to the Academy to strengthen diversity, inclusion, and expand outreach to underrepresented students. And those experiences across 36 countries really taught me tremendous skills that I then parlayed into the civilian sector. And I transitioned out and carried those lessons, focusing on children and families. And my work took me to UNICEF and then to community-based early childhood systems, to statewide and national maternal and child health initiatives. And now I am leading the Bureau of Family Health and Nutrition in Massachusetts at the Department of Public Health. And I also serve as the state maternal and child health Title V director. And why I share all of that is because it really does serve as the overarching infrastructure for maternal and child health in the state. And so that role has brought together the strengths that I've developed and the passions that have shaped me, allowing me to work on and address the issues that families are facing every day. And every chapter has really been grounded in my time at the Coast Guard. It really helped me to lead, stay mission-oriented in complex environments, and really serve with both commitment and passion. So I don't know if that was 60 seconds.
It was 2.5
Oh!
minutes.
It was great, though. It was great.
Got all the details.
We're going to dig into all that more. You did a great overview. We don't even have to record an opening anymore.
No, that was perfect.
Nailed it.
Looking back at your career, do you think there was something that connected all your jobs that you were going through?
I think the connection really comes down to a deep desire for service, to serve, whether it was in a humanitarian organization like the Coast Guard, or thinking about how I can serve others, and in a lot of different ways. And so I think a big part of my leadership is shaped by the intersections of my identity. And as a first generation immigrant, as a veteran, I'm also a sexual assault survivor, a maternal child health advocate, and a wife and a mother. So all of that connection and service ties across all of those identities.
Awesome. Going into your early childhood and upbringing. So you grew up in New London, Connecticut, right? So, and then decided to come to the Coast Guard Academy. Like, how did you hear about the Coast Guard Academy?
Yes. So after my father was transferred from Guam, he was stationed back here at the Academy. And so in many ways, I grew up at the Academy. And once he was stationed here, we never moved. And so the Academy became the backdrop of my childhood. My pediatrician was on base, holiday parties at the Leamy Hall. We did Easter egg hunts on Lower Field. So I really spent a lot of time here. I've been part of this community as a family member, a cadet, an officer, an alumni, a veteran, and maybe someday as a parent of a child, of a cadet.
Yeah, you've seen all sides of the coin, for sure.
Yeah. And I would say part of this is that my father's multiple tours here at the Academy, he had this quiet pride, and I think this gentle hope that I might come here someday. And so he was planting seeds long before I realized that I wanted to come here. But honestly, there's another person in my life who helped those seeds sprout, and she's my dearest childhood friend. Her name's Karen Talaktak. She also grew up in the area, and she also is a Filipina and from a Coast Guard family, and she was passionate about the Coast Guard Academy. And from her perspective, it helped me to consider the Academy in a different way. And so she was the reason I visited with the lens of a prospective cadet, not just as a kid running around the base. And something clicked. The beauty of the Academy, the humanitarian mission, the emphasis on leadership and service, it really aligned with the values I'd been raised with. And so I was really excited.
Can you talk more about those values that you were raised with and your background and how that influenced your leadership?
Yeah, like my mom is probably the hardest working woman I know. That work ethic and that doggedness and that commitment to growth and service was really something that moved me throughout my upbringing, and similarly my father, like his commitment to service. So those values, I think, really helped to shape who I am as a leader. And I started doing all of that even before I came to the Academy, right? So in high school, I was volunteering here. Even at the Academy, I was doing volunteer work. So there was always something driving me to help others, especially those that really didn't have all of the resources and supports. And again, part of that came from my upbringing and my exposure in the Philippines, where you really see the difference between the haves and the have-nots.
That mission, it seems like it drives across your career. And we mentioned earlier in your service. When did you figure out at what point that really became something you wanted to focus on? Or was that just ingrained in you?
I knew about it since I was young. So for me, children's issues became a calling long before I had the language to describe it in that way. And honestly, I can trace it back to a time in junior high school when I first learned about the plight of orphans in Romania. And I know this is kind of crazy, but it stuck with me. Not just about the poverty or the lack of resources, but the profound isolation those children experience. And the absence of love, connection, and responsive care, it wasn't just heartbreaking for me. It was thinking about how their development, their health, and their long-term well-being was eventually impacted and could have been preventable. And so I share that because that really served as a catalyst to keep me thinking about children. And at that point, I didn't know about child development. I didn't know about public health, but I understood something fundamental. And that's that the conditions that children grow up really determine the trajectory of their lives.
Mm.
And I couldn't shake that feeling that we as a society could do so much better. And that early exposure stayed with me, and it planted the seeds that children's well-being wasn't just an interest, it was a responsibility. And so from that point on, I really wove that into all of the work that I was doing, whether it was at the academy, in classes, when I was an officer, in volunteering work, and then just moving forward from there.
Hmm. Can you talk about coming to the academy and volunteering at the academy?
Yeah, so volunteering definitely taught me about leadership long before I ever had any formal authority. And being with people at their most vulnerable moments required humility. It, it meant showing up not as someone with answers, but as someone willing to listen, to follow, and to be part of a community. And I learned that leadership starts with connection, not control. It's built on trust and empathy and the ability to meet people where they're at. And so that lesson was reinforced for me during my first tour in the Coast Guard. And so before I departed, my father, who was retired at that point as a chief, shared 2 pieces of advice that were critical for my survival. First, be a sponge, learn from enlisted members around you, and stay humble in that space. And second, watch the horizon and eat ginger snaps to avoid seasickness. So I share all of that because all of my work, whether it's in volunteering or whether it's being on a boat, it really comes down to, first and foremost, listening.
Mm.
And even on my first cutter, which was the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Mohawk, I was the weapons officer. And when I first met my gunner's mate chief, I realized he had been serving in the Coast Guard longer than I had been alive. That really grounded me immediately. He carried decades of experience, technical mastery, and credibility. And I knew that my first job was listening. So similar to when I would volunteer, it's learning how to just be present, to hear, to connect, to absorb so that I can be able to support in the best way possible rather than just charge in and with my own perceived misconceptions tell people what to do. So that really has shaped how I serve as a leader, is really just to connect first and listen.
That's definitely some good advice. I know it's definitely an interesting challenge coming out of the academy and definitely intimidating for me, especially going into the fleet in about a month. So
Yes, it is
Yeah.
exciting. But I think similar to what my dad shared with me, right? Just go out there and be humble
Mhm.
and connect with the people that are truly the experts because they've been doing this. And so part of it as an officer, as a young officer, is realizing there's only so much that we know.
Mhm.
And we can grow so much more when we can set aside our ego and connect with the people that are around us.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit more about the community you found at the academy? And
Yeah. So community for me began with really recognizing that I needed a place where I felt a deep sense of belonging. And when I arrived here, I actually came here first for a week and then went to NAPS, and then the academy. Being surrounded by a vibrant community, vibrant Filipino community was really critical for me. And so I want to just actually take a moment to go back to that and my connection around being Filipino, because that is also part of what has helped me to find the community that you're talking about. So my Filipino identity shaped my leadership. And I grew up in a small town not too far from here, where I was one of the very few brown families in the community. And from an early age, I understood that I was different, that my family was different, and I didn't necessarily fit in. And that awareness shaped how I move through the world. And at home, again, my family really taught me about the fundamentals of service and the pride in our culture. And in our culture, you don't lead by standing over people. You lead by standing with them. You take care of them, you support them, you make sure you're helping however you can. And with that, it really gives you a sense of belonging when you have that community. And so fast forward to swearing in day, like everyone else, it was life-changing. But my world truly was rocked the moment I met Frances Bacayo. She is a Filipina too, and following in her sister Marie's footsteps, she showed up here at the Academy with this unmistakable presence. Purple Daisy Dukes, a Demi Moore pixie cut, and a voice you could pick out anywhere. And I was showing up in a blue blazer, khakis, and I tried to blend in as humanly possible. And Frances, at 5'2", carried herself with a confidence and joy that filled the room. So I don't know how many people, I know many people out there that would be listening to this know Frances Bacayo, now Fazio. She became my second teacher in how to be a proud, strong Filipino woman who claimed her rightful place. And she helped me to see a version of myself that I hadn't yet learned. And so now fast forward to being at the Academy and then going to NAPS. NAPS, it's amazing because it's a place that when we merged with Navy midshipmen, we suddenly found ourselves surrounded by the largest group of Filipinos I'd ever been around. And so thinking about my childhood where I felt very different, then I go and join the military, and now I'm surrounded by all of these Filipinos that looked like me, shared my cultural references, and understood the duality of being Filipino and American. And even though we were strangers, I felt an immediate sense of connection and belonging that I had never experienced before. And it was the first time I truly felt part of an in-group. And that was truly transformative. And for many who may not know, Filipinos have been serving in the sea service since the early 1900s. But they were limited to the enlisted ranks, right? So stewards and messmen or engineers. So as the generation that are coming to the Academy, we were quite literally standing on their shoulders, reaching for something that they had never had the chance to pursue. And that was our elite education and the opportunity to become an officer. So I share that coming back to your question about community, that community of connection with cadets that look like me and accepted me as my whole self was really probably one of the first times I felt a sense of belonging.
It's funny you say that too, because I think the Filipino contingent, at least at the Academy here, is one of the strongest
I
that
believe
I've
it.
seen.
Yeah.
And it's such a tight-knit community. It's awesome to see that and see that they're standing on your shoulders from when you came here. But yeah, talk about a little bit about how those relationships forged your Academy experience too.
Where do I begin with my relationships? They shaped me here. They got me through the heartaches. They got me through all of the different activities that you're like, why are we doing this? But the challenges that you go through as a cadet bond you in a way that's so uniquely different. And I think those friendships that I was able to establish while I was here, and not just with my classmates, 97, but also class of 96 and class of 98, they remain the people that I hold dearest. They're my support, my beacon, my champions. They're the ones who remind me where I came from and who I am at my core. And not only through the Academy, again, the crazy adventures you go on, right? Fortunately, I was able to get an assignment my first tour with my best friend, Frances, and then with others like Kathy and Joe Muse. We just had a blast on our first cutter together. But our bond was that relationship, that shared experience from the Academy, then going on to the cutter. And then as you're moving into other spaces, you're still connecting with that offshoot of that Coast Guard connection. And it just grounds you. It supports you through so many points of whether you're in the tour and you're feeling that you don't connect, that you don't fit in whatever duty station you're
Mhm.
in to transitions, right? And every transition that you take every 3 to 4 years, that in
Mhm.
itself is hard.
Mhm.
And those relationships anchor you.
Mm.
And they're still to this day my dearest, closest friends.
Mhm. So going into your first tour, and I think you segued us perfectly into your transition to Coast Guard Cutter Mohawk and Key West. Can you talk a little bit about your experience there coming into your first unit and leading teams?
Yeah. When I saw this question, there were some lessons that really resonated with me as I was thinking about that first tour. And one of them that came up was really considering that trust, it's not optional. It really is your operating system. So when you're on a cutter, you learn quickly that you can't do the job by yourself. You really need to trust all of the different people and systems that make that operation work. You trust the watchstander who wakes you in the middle of the night. You trust the crew that you're boarding with during the middle of a high seas. You trust the engineer who says the plant is ready, right? So that trust, it isn't blind. It's built on competence, consistency, and that shared experience. And once it's there, it truly does become the foundation for every high stakes decision that you're engaged in. I think the other thing that came up for me is that I learned that communication is truly the difference between chaos and order.
Mm.
So in high stakes environments where there's compressed time, there's higher risk, you really need clear, frequent communication that keeps teams aligned when conditions are changing minute by minute. You learn to say what you mean, say it early and say it again.
Mhm.
You really need to be clear. You learn how to manage up, giving your CO what they need to make decisions, managing across, keeping your peers informed as the whole ship moves as one. That managing up piece, I cannot stress enough. Here, both while you're in service, but in the civilian sector, that is a skill set that I am constantly supporting my teams to work on, is thinking about how do you manage up? Because if you can support your leaders to be successful in the overall mission, you yourself will be successful
Mhm.
overall. Um, I also learned that courage is often quiet, right? And sometimes it looks like climbing a Jacob's ladder at 2 o'clock in the morning in really rough seas. And for me, that was one of those. Like I was a boarding officer, and it was something that was exciting, crazy. I don't like guns, but it was something that obviously is at the core of what you do, especially as the weapons officer. And then boarding these boats, recognizing that you learn that courage is not the absence of fear. It's doing the job anyways, because your team is counting on you.
That's such a good quote too. I love that quote.
Yeah.
That's like one of my favorite ones. It's like even though you're like nervous or scared, like you just
You
go
gotta
and do it anyway and push
Yeah.
through.
And I think that's one of the things that when I reflect back at my time at the academy and its contrast to now the 20 plus years that I've been operating in the civilian sector and with all my I love my civilian peeps. But there's something different that happens when you are connected with classmates and shipmates under stress and you have to just come together.
Yeah.
You set aside your ego and you really work together. You either are part of a team in a followership role or you need to step up as a leader, but then you may have to come back into the team role, and that's okay. And moving between those spaces without ego is really an important skill set.
Was there like a time where you were like, you didn't communicate clearly and you learned that lesson in that moment of like, oh man, I guess I should have said it this way, or maybe I needed to say it more firmly, or, like, is there a tangible example of like where that communication maybe failed you and you were like, oh, next time I'm going to have to do it like this?
For me, I can't say that there was one specific. I will say, though, that I'm an introvert and really quiet and shy,
Yeah.
and especially in how I was raised culturally. Like as a Filipina, as a female, you are raised to speak only when you're spoken to. You don't make direct eye contact, right? So all of that. So even coming here to the academy, speaking up in class was a challenge for me. And then getting onto the boat again, I was like, how do I speak up as an ensign in this role.
Yeah.
I bring that up because part of this was, it really was a challenge for me to learn how to use my voice in spaces that I was not clearly comfortable or confident in, and at times did not feel like I belonged in, which also makes you feel that much more vulnerable,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? And so I think over the years, clearly, I can talk now. And people are often like, "You're not an introvert." But yes, I am. So it's like finding my voice and speaking up. There was one time, and I reflect on when I was on the cutter, and it was really poor conditions. And as the boarding officer, I had to make the decision with my team that it was not conducive or safe for us to board a certain vessel. And, again, in the middle of the night, everyone's on deck, everyone's watching from the boat. And I had to make that recommendation to my CEO,
Mhm.
knowing that, there was an interest to see what was on this vessel.
Yeah.
And but it was the courage to be able to speak up and say that we need to reevaluate the situation rather than risk the lives of our crew.
Mm.
It's powerful and empowering,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And that was one of those examples where, as a female leading oftentimes male dominated teams, I knew that I had built trust with my boarding team,
Mm.
that we could work, assess, determine, and recommend together. But that as the boarding officer, I was the lead on that,
Mhm.
and that I can speak on behalf of my team, and they backed me,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
so that took time, that took effort, but yeah, it was empowering.
Awesome. And then moving into your next assignment, so you go to the International Training Division. Can you quickly break down what that job is and what role you played there?
Sure. So I joined the International Training Division in 1999, and at that point, there was only one other woman that had been at that unit. So it's ITD.
Mhm.
Katie Groves. She is a woman of color, a trailblazer. She broke the ceiling in that unit before I ever arrived. And she guided me and encouraged me and showed me that women could belong in this highly specialized male dominant space. Because ITD, what they were tasked to do was to go out and work with military and civilian entities in countries all over the world. And then we had a long-term training division, and you would go out for 3 months out in the field and integrated into their various, like Colombian Navy, as an example. And then there was short-term training. And the short-term training was 6-week type of training modules that you would go. And that's what I did. So I would go and I traveled around the world teaching teams leadership, team building, defensive tactics, and oftentimes was the only female in these spaces
Mhm.
teaching them. And so I'm pretty sure those guys were as surprised that it was me out there as well as I was, especially showing up. And that was back in the day when you didn't have Zoom or virtual calls to
Mhm.
coordinate all of this. So Elaine Fitzgerald, like doing all these coordination, and then I would show up and they're like, "Oh, you don't look like Elaine Fitzgerald," right? And so it was an interesting experience just being part of all of that.
Mhm. And what dynamics did you notice with being the only woman in that space?
I think on one hand, it was life-changing, right? I was 25. I was traveling to every corner of the globe and building my skills to teach and train. Um, at the same time, I was alone in a way that felt painfully familiar to my childhood,
Mhm.
not fully fitting in. And I would do the morning workouts like everyone else, but I wasn't lifting weights with my ops boss or getting invited to golf or, going out for drinks like my male counterparts were. And I realized in time that mattered.
Mm.
Those informal relationships shaped visibility, opportunity, and how people were perceived. My boss wasn't in country with me as well, like when I would go travel. So he wasn't seeing my work directly.
Mhm.
So my performance was filtered through country reports
Mm.
and through the eyes of my male teammates, some of whom were still uncomfortable having a woman as their team lead. And culturally, again, I was raised to be humble and to let my actions speak for themselves. But in that environment, humility made me invisible. I had to learn, sometimes painfully, that if I didn't lift up my own accomplishments and proactively frame challenges as opportunities,
Mhm.
other stories would be heard first. So no one else was going to advocate for me. And so in that experience, I truly, again, had to find my voice. I had to advocate for myself. I had to be clear about the assignments and the opportunities I wanted instead of waiting for them to come to me. And so, what did it feel like? It felt like holding the world in my hands with all of the excitement, newness, and adventure, while also carrying this deep sense of loneliness.
Mm.
Um, it felt like being grateful for these extraordinary experiences while I was also navigating the reality of being an outsider in a space that wasn't built for me.
Mm.
And it taught me lessons that I continue to carry today about self advocacy, about visibility, about the responsibility of leaders to make sure that no one on your team ever feels as alone as I did when I was in those
Mm.
years. Fortunately, the story doesn't end there because one of my female classmates, Camilla Messing, was assigned to tackle it. And our shared experience of being the only female officers in an elite law enforcement unit was life-saving.
Mhm.
And by my second year at ITD, more women began to get assigned to the unit, including Pinsuda Alexander. So between Camilla and Pinsuda, they became part of my sisterhood and support system. So I was no longer the only one. It reminded me how powerful representation
Mm.
is, and it deepened even more my appreciation for women leaders who open doors, hold them open, and make sure others can walk through with a little bit more confidence than we had.
Awesome. Moving into your next role at the come back to the Coast Guard Academy and going into admissions, you find a really big mentor there.
I did. I
Yes.
did. So Captain Susan Bebo, she modeled a kind of leadership that stays with you for a lifetime. She was part of the first class of women to enter the academy, one of the original trailblazers who broke barriers simply by having the courage to walk through these arches. And she excelled in spaces that never included women before. And so by the time I met her, she had already built a legacy. But what struck me was how she led. So by the time I joined Academy admissions as a minority recruiting officer, it was my third tour. And she was the first female officer I had ever reported to. So I just want to let that
Hmm.
sink in.
Hmm.
I'd already served 5 years before I ever reported to a woman.
Mhm.
And I remember being in awe of her presence. She carried herself with this blend of confidence and compassion that felt both powerful and deeply human. And there was a calmness about her, a clarity and a way of creating space for others to learn, grow, and stretch. And she showed me that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about steady,
Mhm.
empathetic leadership that's grounded in your values. And she embodied the idea that you can be both strong and kind, as well as decisive and inclusive. And when I arrived at admissions, it was on an emergency transfer so I could be close to my father who was sick. And she didn't just welcome me, she cared for me. My father passed before I even was able to report in. And she gave me the space to settle, to grieve, and to find my footing. And during that time with her, in small and almost imperceptible moments, she helped me again find my voice. She encouraged me to speak up, to make recommendations, and she listened. She listened. That
Hmm.
was a big part of it that I don't think I truly experienced in my other two tours. And when I would make recommendations, they were taken and implemented And I felt myself growing into a leader I wanted to become. And it feels especially meaningful to reflect on her leadership now,
Mm-hmm.
right? As we mark the 50th anniversary of Women at the Coast Guard Academy, her legacy is woven into that milestone. And it truly shaped the kind of leader I strive to be every day.
Awesome. I want to talk a little bit about your transition to moving into the civilian sector. So you go to Columbia University and get your master's and then your doctorate as well. Can you
Mhm.
talk about that process for you? And so you decided to use the GI Bill.
That transition from active duty to civilian, I had always known that I wanted to work on children's issues. That really was an underpinning throughout my life. And so I knew that I just was going to do my 5 years. Inevitably did an additional 2. And honestly, I will reflect back that it helped me in ways that I didn't know at the time. And part of that was that allowed me to be eligible for the GI Bill. And
Mm.
so,
Hmm.
but that wasn't first in my mind, right? I was like, I'm ready. I'm ready to move on and take the skills and experience that I gained in the Coast Guard and apply it to working in the children's field in some way or another. And so I transitioned into my master's program and found myself surrounded by incredibly impressive, diverse professionals all over the world. I think one of the challenging pieces was that my military background wasn't always understood or appreciated. And at times,
Mm.
I would find myself doubting that I belonged there, right? Whether it was at my master's program or at the UN. And those moments of that imposter syndrome would start to come up. And although I was really proud of my time of being in the Coast Guard, it for my international classmates and colleagues at the UN, they saw me through the lens of their own experiences or perceptions of the US military.
Mm.
And so I even had a supervisor at the UN that told me that my time in the Coast Guard didn't really count. Now, at that point, I had already been in the service 12 plus years.
Mhm.
It was a blow. So that transition from active duty to the civilian sector was bumpy, but a big part of it was that I remained grounded in my commitment, but I also remained connected to my my Coast Guard connections. So once I moved to New York City to attend Columbia
Mhm.
University, I was connected to my classmates that were stationed in New York.
Yeah.
And so I still had this support system that allowed me to, dip my toe and,
Mhm.
explore these areas that stretched me while I also still felt supported.
And how did you reframe that for the civilian sector, your career, and like what challenges did you face with that? And
I mean, I see it in different spaces, right? Like part of it is still demonstrating through action, right? Showing up with humility,
Mhm.
um, being patient and not taking personal any of their comments and taking that as an opportunity to help them understand and translate some of what we do, moving away from the military titles so that they can see that, when you're a weapons officer, that also translates into a leader that
Mhm.
can oversee a body of work and um, move an operation forward with a
Mhm.
diverse group of folks, right? So that can happen in any sector. And so part of it was just helping them see that I was a reliable,
Mhm.
trustworthy, committed person.
Mhm.
And then that would help them to better appreciate and have a greater openness to understanding how military experience is actually quite an advantage. And even in my role in state government now in Massachusetts, I serve as the executive sponsor for our veteran employee resource group. So we have
Mhm.
veterans, obviously, transition into state government. But a big part of it is helping people to understand and appreciate what veterans bring into the space.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot there that we can do to support veterans feel like they belong, to feel like they have a connection, but also for others that are receiving them to understand, wow, they have deep skills.
Mhm.
And if we are able to fit them in the right way, then, we'll actually do so much more.
Mm. Awesome. Moving into UNICEF, your first internship and then consulting job there.
Yeah, so that was the position where the supervisor was like, "This isn't really,
Yeah.
you know, your first job."
Mm.
I think one of the things that also there was an experience that I had where my supervisor, who was younger than me, had fewer years of experience, really made it difficult, not only for me, but my peers. And I share that because I was able to withstand, recognizing and remembering that it helped me to see, oh, this is not how I want to be, but also how in the civilian sector, it also gave me an appreciation of how much training, education, and experience we get starting at the academy and then into your tours from a young ensign all the way up, leadership and management, that the civilian sector don't get.
Yeah, I was
That
just
is
gonna
very,
Mhm.
very rare. And so to me, it was an opportunity to again set aside my ego and help to just patiently demonstrate through my doggedness and my high quality work that I can do this.
So leaving UNICEF, you move into building blocks.
I did. So at a certain point, I wanted to transition from international work and move over to domestic. And I had an opportunity to come back here to New London County and lead an early childhood initiative as the project director. And I was building that from the ground up, hiring the staff, um, thinking about what is our framework and our engagement, our service delivery model, building out relationships with community partners, thinking about how do we support families. And the whole purpose of this initiative was to support families with a young child under 5 that had mental health needs and getting them the supports and services that they needed. And here at the time, there wasn't that coordinated care.
Mhm.
So the objective of this initiative was to build that system of care.
Mhm.
And so it was exciting. I loved it. I loved coming back to New London. My family's here. I was able to connect back to my
Mhm.
friends that were stationed at the academy and enjoy the academy in a way as an adult to appreciate, well, New London County, to appreciate the beauty
Mm.
of this area. And I think one of the other things that I found great comfort in was that the civilians that I was engaging in here in New London know about the Coast Guard,
Mhm.
know about the academy, and they show respect for
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have to convince people who I was. Once they knew I was a graduate from the academy and an officer, um, there was a certain level of appreciation and respect that allowed me to bridge that gap, right? Around like, because in the human service field, many people grow up in that field. You stay in that field and you
Yeah.
just move up.
Mhm.
And so I, in, in some respects, was an outsider coming into this space. But because I was a local and because, I came from the academy, there was another layer of respect that they gave me that allowed me to step into rooms and spaces with more confidence. I also reflect on that was the moment when the skills that I loved, the strengths that I was able to build up in the military, leadership, management, team building, I was able to bring with the areas that I was passionate about
Mhm.
and bring it
Mm.
together in this space in a way that I wasn't able to do in others, right? So the Coast Guard, I got the skills, but it wasn't in the area that I was passionate about.
Mm.
UNICEF, I was able to work on areas that I was passionate about, but I wasn't leveraged
Mhm.
to use the skills that I really enjoyed. Here, I was leading and building in a way that would support families across the
Mm.
county, and actually continues to be a model for the nation in different ways. And so that's just really exciting.
Mm.
So building blocks, that's an amazing it must have felt so good. Like, how
Mm.
big was your team that you ended up building?
We ended up probably with about 2 dozen
Oh, that's
folks. Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. The challenges that were lifted up during that time. So it was hiring from scratch. And there were probably about 5 different community organizations that were part of this, where staff were hired through the organization, but they were seated together under
Mm.
building blocks in one location. So that way, because it was grant funded, and oftentimes grants are time limited. So then once the dollars go away, then those individuals would go back to their main organizations,
Yeah.
and they would be embedded with this service delivery model. So that was one piece, is that it was really bringing together all of these different organizations that have their own agenda, have their
Mhm.
own history, have their own competing needs. And my team was very diverse. Our goal was to support families that have a young child with special healthcare needs, mental health needs. And we had a model where we were engaging families with lived experience to be part of our team. So now my team included clinicians as well as family leaders. And
Awesome.
together, the pair would work with a family in their home to support them in what we call wraparound services, to get the care coordination, to help the family member find their voice, to advocate for what their child needs, etc. And so even just the pairing of a family leader and a clinician was extremely novel. And so that was back in 2006 timeframe, 20 years ago. Was that 20 years ago? Oh my goodness. 20 years ago. And to this day, even in Massachusetts, we are continuing to expand on that because, we live in a hierarchical society, and the family members that don't always have the voice or the agency aren't the ones that are able to inform systems, right? And
Or even
so,
navigate
or
them.
navigate the
Yeah.
system. So here, we were creating the space, not only for families to be part of delivering and designing the systems, but also it would shape how we were including families overall. The work that I did here in New London with building blocks continue to inform how I lead today because it was grounded in the community. It centers the work around the child and the family, and they're the ones that are telling us this is what we need, because we approach it with you as the family, you're the expert of your child.
Yeah.
You have a seat at this table. And so therefore, you tell us clinicians and providers, right? Versus the reverse is what happens all too often is when you have the professional saying, no, this is what you need to do, and dismiss the concerns that are being lifted up.
Well, and I think, those moments are so vulnerable too for families. Like it's very hard to ask for help, I think, for a lot of
Yes.
folks. So I
And
think,
and that's a big reason why having a family partner there is so critical.
yeah.
Because the family partner can say, I've been there. I know it. I can sit with you. I can
Right.
hold this space with you.
Yeah.
And they can be the anchor while they're in a family meeting,
Yeah.
right, with clinicians, even just holding the hand and saying, you got this, right? And because it is intimidating.
Well, and I love that we're going back to you brought up earlier how important it is to listen and that you learned about listening. And it's like this, you're
Yeah.
building that system on that basis of we're listening first,
Yeah.
not just acting.
And it's off those skills you learned in the Coast Guard too, and applying those into the civilian world and into your mission.
Even going back to one of your first questions about the values, a big part of this is listening to connect and to support people to feel like they belong and are valuable here, right? And that took time through my journey, but yes, the Coast Guard really helped me to hone it in on that.
And moving into that new role that you have now, your current role at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, where you lead that Bureau of Family Health and Nutrition, it's a much, much larger department, right?
Yes.
So what was that transition like for you moving into that larger area where you're looking at it from a much bigger perspective?
I will say, after my doctorate, I worked in nonprofit organizations where I was leading national initiatives. So I did that for a number of years, and then COVID happened. And at that point, working on national, I still felt pretty removed. So when COVID happened and it was a public health crisis, I was like, oh, I need to get in it. So then that's when I made my transition to the state government level to oversee the Bureau of Family Health and Nutrition. I went small and local, went national, and now I'm at the state level. So overseeing the Bureau of Family Health and Nutrition, it's like coming home. I love it. It brings me joy. The challenges are amazing, intense, they stretch me. My brain hurts at the end of the day, but I feel like what we are doing at the population level for all families is it's amazing, it's exciting. And when I think about it at a population level for the state, we represent about, when you look at families from children to through the reproductive years, that makes up about 4 million people. That's 60% of the population in Massachusetts. So that's who we are connecting with in some capacity,
Mhm.
right? And there's over 50 different initiatives that fall within my bureau, from WIC to early intervention to home visiting to services for children and youth with special health care needs, because we're working with birthing people, so pregnancy to postpartum, infancy up to 22, and those kids and young adults that have special health care needs.
When
And
you say 22 years old?
yeah,
Wow.
Mm.
yeah.
Okay.
So when you're really thinking about those that have special healthcare needs, complex medical needs,
Yeah.
so that's inclusive of 22,
Okay.
and ensuring that they have the services, the supports that they need. And at the state level, not only are we looking at getting those services out to the community, but also informing policy. How do we
Mm.
create better, more coordinated, respectful, inclusive care for families? And that's what I can do in Massachusetts.
Awesome.
So obvious that you're passionate about it, you know?
Mm.
I mean, it's like it just exudes from you when you talk about the work you're doing now. We talked about, relationship building and that listening piece. Is there some examples in your current job where, having those strong relationships have really enabled you to push through some initiatives that maybe you weren't sure, oh, are we going to be able to pull this one off?
There's one in particular. Massachusetts is the only state in the country with a statewide statutory right to shelter law. And under this law, families with children and pregnant people who meet specific criteria can have a guaranteed right to emergency shelter. And that
Mm.
and in practice, that means that a pregnant person or a family with children if they have nowhere to stay, the state must provide placement and support through our emergency assistance shelters. And so within my bureau, one of our programs is responsible for supporting these families once they enter the shelter. And so that includes coordination of care, supports. In recent years, we've seen a sharp rise in the number of families experiencing homelessness. And a lot of that comes from tight housing market, new arrivals to the state. Everything that's happening geopolitically creates more demand for entry into the US, delays in federal work authorizations, all of this. And so the demand for shelter quickly outpaced available beds. And families were arriving, especially if they're coming um, from different countries through trauma, through
Mm.
surviving a lot of different things, needing urgent medical, sometimes developmental or social needs. And what we were able to do within my bureau, what allowed us to respond effectively, was the strength of the relationships that we have. We've built across all of these programs within my bureau that are interconnected. Because those relationships were already in place, we were able to mobilize pretty quickly. So we were able to get pregnant and postpartum women, infants and children connected to WIC, our food assistance program. We were able to get families that had kids with delays or at risk of delays into early intervention. We were able to get community supports for those families that had kids with special health care needs. All of that happened pretty seamlessly and fluidly as the numbers of families were increasing, and we were at capacity, but we were thinking out of the box around how we can best support those. And that level of coordination is especially critical at times when, again, these families needing assistance was rapidly rising. The system was under a lot of strain, but the relationships that we had at the system's programmatic level was able to immediately translate to supporting families in a way that obviously is life-saving for many of them that are in the program.
And when we say relationships, what does that look like for you?
With my staff in the programs that they oversee, it's trusting them as the experts of their programs and knowing the families that they serve. So when they lift up that they are experiencing a challenge, that we are seeing greater demand, we don't have enough staffing. We need these services. There is a breakdown in the process. Like all of that is lifted up because they know that I will take time to hear them, problem solve with them, and then navigate through the bureaucratic processes so that we can create a better situation and environment. And all of that comes with relationships. That my approachability, my accessibility, my ability to hear and listen allows them to raise these challenges up to me.
Are there any like specific misconceptions you think you see with veterans that transition to the civilian sector and maybe some issues they face?
Yeah, I think a common misconception is that military leadership is purely top down and directive.
Mm.
Many people imagine a culture built on rigid hierarchy where orders flow one way and people simply follow. I think another misconception is that military professionals are a monolith.
Mm.
hmm
Same backgrounds, same motivations, same worldview. Um, and again, as I shared earlier, civilians sometimes assume that military experience doesn't count because they don't understand how it translates, so it then becomes dismissed. And so I think a big part of my role is helping people to see that that there are so many professional skills that you can bring into this space and changing some of those misconceptions.
So if you look back and yourself as a cadet, and what do you think you would tell yourself as you look forward at your career now and where you stand now?
I think the younger version of me needed reassurance more than anything. So I would tell her to enjoy it while it lasts.
hmm
To also to hold tight to friendships that make you better. And stop worrying so much because things have a way of working itself out. And that those relationships and experiences will carry you farther than you can ever imagine.
What would you tell someone who feels overlooked?
hmm That's
That there's a need to turn inward before looking outward. I tell them to ground themselves in their values, recognize and name their strengths and gifts that they bring into this world, and lean on to the supportive, trustworthy relationships that help them to see more clearly during those times that are challenging, where they may feel overlooked. And honestly, if they're feeling overlooked, it may mean that there's a lesson in that place they haven't finished learning
Mm.
yet, or that it's a time to clear their own path and really set their own way with their own driven intentions.
one more question. What do you think that your legacy would be? What do you want to leave behind, and what do you want your career to be encapsulated by?
I thought about that in two ways.
hmm
One is around my work, right? Like that I am able to leave, at least in the state of Massachusetts, a system that can better support families so that they can support their children to thrive, be healthy, and optimize their well-being. And because of how broad and expansive the work is within my bureau and all of the connections that we have across the state, I'm optimistic about that. I'm excited about that. I think there's also a legacy here that I hope my daughter would also see is that me as an individual, I'm more than just a mom, right? That we all bring our full experiences to whatever we do. And that includes being resilient and grounded in your values and knowing what your worth is and making a difference in the world. Like really thinking about how am I contributing to this space so that I am leaving it better than the way it came. And that showing up with curiosity and kindness is a really big part of that. And ultimately, surrounding yourself with meaningful, supportive relationships is one of the greatest rewards in life. Like, honestly, all of this, if nothing else, that I have a legacy is my daughter, my family, and my friends that have just made my life so rich.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in. I know
Thank you.
your talk had so much talk about relationship building and trust and teams. I think that's something that's so important to the military in general and being an officer. And it's awesome to hear that how you talk about bringing up finding your voice and standing up for yourself.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for
Of
the
course.
invitation. It truly has been an honor to be in this space with you.
That was our conversation for today. Thank you for joining us here in Studio 1887. Please stick around for a few more minutes as I spotlight what your impact looks like in action here at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy in a short closing segment we're calling the Alumni Impact Interlude. Financial support from the Alumni Association is a game changer for the overall cadet experience. Learn more from the following cadet who is directly benefiting from your support. It's time for the Alumni Impact Interlude, and today we're talking about our support of our international cadets and the International Cadet Council. Through our Cadet Activities Fund, we help support the council in their efforts to host events and more. I'm joined today by First Class Ali De La Vega, who is the president of the International Cadet Council, to talk about that impact. Welcome, Ali.
Welcome.
So to start, can you tell our listeners where you're from?
So, good morning, everybody. I'm from the Philippines, and yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
How did you end up here at the Coast Guard Academy from the Philippines?
That's a great question. So, um, my my dad was originally in the Philippine Coast Guard, but how I found out about this whole program and all, I followed the Philippine Coast Guard Facebook page, and I just came across the application just posted on Facebook, and I was like, this seems really interesting. Why not?
Awesome. So you're about to graduate here in a little bit. You've been here for 4 years. Can you, as you're nearing graduation, if you had to define your CGA experience in 3 words, what would they be?
If I had to define my experience in 3 words, I think the first one would be rigor, just because the academy is is very rigorous by nature with balancing all of our military obligations, academics, uh, physical fitness standards, and all that. It's just rigorous by nature. And second one would be inclusive. I'd say the my experience has been very inclusive. The council has made this place been very welcoming to us international cadets, and just all the programs have been tailored for everybody's success, both U.S. and international cadets too. And the last word would be, I'd say, transformational. I think if I were to go back 4 years ago, because I was very hesitant when I chose to go here and move 20 hours away. Now looking back, I wouldn't change that decision in a heartbeat.
Awesome. So how does the International Cadet Council support not only international cadets, but the entire Corps?
That's a great question, and I feel like this gets overlooked a lot. But the International Council, yes, we're tailored and we're led by mostly international cadets, but we support a very important uh, Coast Guard mission, which is international relations. And I think the International Council is not just a club, uh, just a regular club, but the International Council bridges and builds a global network of service because as we know, the Coast Guard operates beyond borders, and it's not just the U.S. Coast Guard that that's present in the whole world. But we have different services and different governments all around the world. We're currently represented by 30 international cadets right now, over 20 partnering nations. And that shared cultural exchange and cultural immersion from one cadet to another just enriches that experience even more for everybody in the Corps of Cadets. And one thing that a word I'd say that we've been throwing out a lot is interoperability. And the International Council just provides human interoperability. And you may never know. I've heard stories from uh, the alumni who I've met here, wherein they would even see their old classmates on different boats in global operations too.
That's
So
awesome.
I know.
It is so cool. I think, I studied abroad when I was in college, and I just think there's nothing like that experience for you as an individual. But I think what you all bring as international cadets to the entire Corps is so powerful because cadets don't get that opportunity to study abroad. So, they get a lot of that international exposure, I think, through
Mhm.
the International Council and the cadets that are here. What was your favorite International Council event that you guys had since you've been here now 4 years?
Ooh. Um, we just hosted this event for the third year in a row here. It was the Inter Service Academy International Ball.
Whoa, do you guys host that here at the academy?
Yes,
Oh, that's so cool.
yes. It was actually like a tradition way back, and it used to rotate around various service academies. But after COVID, there's been a lot of complications, and I was part of the first team that I was a third class cadet uh, when we first brought it back after COVID, and it's just been a great event. We've invited senior leadership. We've invited um, all the other service academies here. We've invited different alumni, even international alumni
Oh,
from um, other services too, from other countries, and even senior leadership staff from the Naval War College too. It's it's just it's just a great event for networking, expanding your connections, and just having a great time.
so another area of support that the Alumni Association provides is to help cover travel costs for family members of international cadets so they can attend commencement. And many thanks to our class of 2016 and donors to our CGA Today Fund who help support this initiative. What does that support mean to those international cadets who are able to have their families join them on this momentous day?
I I think it means everything to all the current international cadets, to all the past international cadets that has been affected by um, the alumni association because like I've mentioned, I'm a 20-hour flight away, and it could be worse too. We only get we only get so much chances to go back home and see our family. Not to mention the time difference. I know FaceTime is already here and we could video call them, but the time difference makes it a lot harder. We're just really thankful to the Alumni Association to give us uh help in these certain events, especially graduation, which is the the, the pinnacle of our experience here. So it's been great.
Who from your family is going to come?
Um, uh, my aunt, my mom, and my brother, they're all coming for graduation.
Nice.
So I'm really
Oh,
excited.
well, First Class De La Vega, thank you so much for taking time to talk about the International Council. And, congratulations as you're nearing graduation. And I hope you have an amazing time with your family coming up here in just about a month.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to our alumni community for your continued engagement. You are what keep this community strong and thriving, especially our members. Membership in your alumni association matters. It empowers connections between our alumni and the Academy to develop thriving and enduring relationships. It supports state-of-the-art and margin of excellence enhancements for the Corps of Cadets. And membership also comes with some pretty cool benefits, like access to professional development and certifications, unique connection opportunities to grow your network, discounts and savings when welcoming back the whole family for homecoming, and so much more. Your membership even supports projects like this podcast. So stay connected, stay up to date, and ensure that your ties to the Long Blue Line remain strong. Become a member today at cgaalumni.org/1887. If this conversation resonated with you, please subscribe, rate, and share with your network so these stories can continue to reach and connect our community. Until next time.